For a second, I honestly didn't understand what he meant. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. Wanted to say that talking was exactly how Ryan had justified leaving. Talking was how he'd made excuses. Talking was how he'd walked out 12 years ago without looking back at the child he left behind. But Jake didn't flinch. He just sat there, calm in a way that almost scared me, patient like a stone in a river, letting the current crash around him while he stayed exactly where he was. My throat tightened so fast, it felt like I'd swallowed a handful of needles. I turned back to our attorney, and the words came out thinner than I wanted. "What do you mean, we could lose?" Our attorney rubbed his face like he was trying to wipe the exhaustion off his skin. Then he exhaled slowly, one of those breaths people take when the truth is ugly and there's no gentle way to dress it up. "Family court is unpredictable," he said. "You're his stepmother. You did everything right, raised him, provided for him, documented everything. But biologically, Ryan is still his father. And Ryan's lawyer is going to argue that you deliberately kept Jake from him, that you're controlling money that belongs to Ryan as Jake's legal parent." My stomach dropped so hard my palms went cold. In my head, I saw Ryan the way he'd appeared on my doorstep last month, standing in the rain like he'd practiced the scene in front of a mirror, hair perfectly styled, voice trembling in all the right places, hands held up like he was surrendering. "I just want my son back," he'd said, as if he hadn't dropped Jake into my life like unwanted luggage and vanished for 12 years without a single call to check if his child was even alive. Then Jake's whisper echoed again, quiet, steady, almost clinical. "Just don't interrupt him." The attorney leaned forward, fingers interlaced. His eyes stayed on mine like he was trying to anchor me. "We need you calm in there," he said. "Let Ryan testify. Let his lawyer talk. Don't react. Don't get emotional. Don't give them ammunition." I looked at Jake, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Is that what you meant?" I asked. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "And that," he said softly, "is how this whole nightmare started. Right before the judge walked in. Right before Ryan tried to take what he never earned and never wanted until it was worth something." My lungs forgot how to breathe for a moment, because suddenly I understood the terror underneath Jake's calm. He wasn't telling me to stay quiet because he was afraid. He was telling me to stay quiet because he'd been preparing for this war longer than I had. And if I messed up, if I interrupted even once, Ryan might finally succeed at the one thing he'd always been good at: taking from Jake without ever paying the price. To understand why Jake's advice mattered so much, you need to know what happened the night Ryan left. And you need to know what I saw in Jake's eyes when the door closed and the rain swallowed the sound of his father's footsteps. Because that was the exact moment my life became something I never planned for, never wanted, and couldn't escape. 12 years ago, Portland was soaked in one of those October rains that doesn't fall, it presses. The kind that turns the streets glossy black under streetlights and soaks through your clothes in seconds, no matter how thick you think your jacket is. I remember that night clearly because my work boots were completely waterlogged when I got home from my shift at Memorial Hospital. I'd spent the entire evening fixing a busted water heater in the pediatric wing, crawling through tight service spaces, shoulders jammed against pipes, the kind of work nobody notices unless it fails and everything floods. My hands smelled like bleach and rust. My lower back throbbed like someone had driven a spike straight through it. When I pushed open the door to our apartment on Morrison Street, the kitchen lights were on. An old rock station hummed softly from the radio, fading in and out with the rain. And Jake was sitting at the table with his knees pulled up to his chest, rocking slightly, the way he always did when anxiety crept in. He was 7 then, thin, pale, his arms wrapped tightly around his legs like he was trying to hold himself together. Ryan stood at the counter. His purse was gone, because now it was his leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. His keys were already in his hand. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Ryan used to run out late all the time. Pharmacy runs, grocery store excuses, random errands paired with stories that never quite lined up. I assumed this was just another one of those. Then I saw the suitcase. Not an overnight bag, a full suitcase, the big one we'd bought from Goodwill when we first moved in together. My chest tightened instantly. "What's going on?" I asked. Ryan didn't turn around. He just stared at the sink, letting the water run like he was washing dishes that weren't there. "I can't do this anymore," he said. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process the sentence. "Do what?" I asked. "Make dinner? It's Tuesday. We usually do tacos." That's when he turned to face me. His hair was styled, his jacket clean. He'd put on the nice watch his brother gave him for Christmas. He looked ready, prepared in a way that told me this moment hadn't been impulsive. Jake sat there, rocking, counting silently under his breath. "Jake needs more than I can give him," Ryan said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "This apartment, this life, it's suffocating me. I can't breathe here." I glanced at Jake. He didn't look up, just traced patterns on the tablecloth with his finger, small, repetitive movements he used when the world got too loud. "Ryan," I said carefully, forcing my voice steady, "we just got the diagnosis 3 months ago. We barely started therapy. The doctor said—" "Exactly," he snapped. "That diagnosis. Autism therapy appointments every week. Special education meetings. I didn't sign up for this life." The words hit like a fist to my throat. "You didn't sign up for your own child?" I asked quietly. His jaw clenched. "Don't do that." I stepped closer, my boots squeaking on the linoleum. "Do what? Say the truth?" He looked past me, toward the window. I followed his gaze. Headlights glowed in the parking lot below. A car sat idling, exhaust puffing into the cold air. My stomach turned to ice. "You're leaving," I said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to live my life," Ryan shot back. "I'm still young. I'm not spending the rest of it in doctors' offices and school meetings arguing about accommodations." "How old is he?" I asked before I could stop myself. His face flushed. "That's none of your business." "It is my business," I snapped, anger finally breaking through. "Because you're walking out on your son for someone waiting in a car." Jake started rocking faster. His breathing changed, shorter, sharper. His fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth like it was the only solid thing left in the room. I softened instantly, crouching slightly. "Buddy, it's okay. Everything's okay." Ryan grabbed the suitcase handle. "He'll be fine with you," he said. "You're good at this." I stared at him, stunned. "I'm not his mother. I'm your girlfriend who moved in 2 years ago. I fix hospital equipment for a living. I don't know how to raise a child, especially one who needs specialized care." "You're patient," he said, like that settled it. "You're stable, you're reliable, you're exactly what he needs. I'm not." Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the new cologne, the phone calls taken behind closed doors, the way he'd started saying, "You deserve better," instead of, "I'm sorry." "I'll call when things settle down," he added quickly. I knew, standing there with wet boots and aching hands, that he wouldn't. "Ryan," I said, my voice cracking, "look at him, please. Just look at your son." He didn't. He leaned down, kissed the top of Jake's head, quick, impersonal, like saying goodbye to a pet, and walked out. Cold air rushed in, smelling like rain and pavement and exhaust. Then the door closed. Soft. Final. The radio kept playing. Jake didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at his reflection in the dark window. "Mom?" he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, buddy. She'll come back," he said, not hopeful, just factual. I wanted to lie, but I couldn't. "I don't know if she will," I said, "but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He nodded once, counting softly under his breath. Outside, the car pulled away, and just like that, my life became something I never planned for, but chose to stay in anyway. The next morning, I called in late to work for the first time in my life. I stood in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the spot on the floor where Ryan's suitcase had rested the night before. The outline was still there, dust disturbed, carpet fibers flattened, like a ghost refusing to move on. "I have a family emergency," I told my supervisor. My voice sounded distant, even to me. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Take the time you need," in that careful tone people use when they sense something has already gone wrong. Jake sat at the table, hands tucked deep into his sleeves, eyes fixed straight ahead. He hadn't touched his cereal. The milk was already going warm. "We're going to be late today," I said gently. He nodded once. The drive to school felt longer than usual. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the city into gray smears of light. The heater blew warm air that smelled faintly like dust and antifreeze. Jake didn't say a word the entire ride. When I dropped him off, his teacher, Mrs. Palmer, stopped me in the hallway. "We need to talk about Jake's evaluation results," she said softly, like she was afraid I might break. I nodded like I understood what that meant. I didn't. I was a maintenance technician. I fixed pipes, replaced wiring, unclogged drains. I didn't know anything about therapy plans or IEP meetings or how to advocate for a child in a system that spoke a language I barely understood. The weeks after Ryan left blurred together into a haze of appointments, paperwork, and bills that multiplied overnight like they sensed weakness. I spent my lunch breaks on hold with insurance companies, listening to looping elevator music while strangers explained coverage limits like they were reading grocery prices. I spent my evenings poring over pamphlets from the autism clinic until the words swam together. I was exhausted, running on caffeine, adrenaline, and fear. At church one Sunday, I sat in the back pew, hoping no one would ask where Ryan was. During the final hymn, an older woman named Dorothy slipped into the seat beside me. She smelled like peppermint and wore a coat that looked older than both of us combined. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "Support group," she whispered. "Thursday nights, church hall. Coffee's awful, but the people understand." I went, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. The church basement smelled like stale coffee and lemon cleaner. Folding chairs formed a loose circle. A box of donuts sat on a table, already picked over. There were parents there who looked like they hadn't slept in years. A grandfather raising his grandson alone. A mother with a notebook packed full of therapy schedules and medication times. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to stay quiet. The words came out anyway. "My name is Claire," I said, "and my partner left a month ago. I'm raising his son alone. I don't know what I'm doing." No one gasped. No one judged me. They just nodded. After the meeting, a man named Frank, wearing a navy baseball cap with a veteran patch stitched onto the side, clapped me on the shoulder. "You keep every receipt," he said. "Every email, every voicemail, everything. Trust me." At the time, it sounded paranoid. I listened anyway. Because when your world falls apart overnight, you cling to advice that feels solid, even if you don't fully understand why. That's how I spent the next 12 years, staying. Learning Jake's rhythms the way you learn a complicated song. How his socks had to be folded just right. How grocery stores overwhelmed him. How sitting quietly in the truck for 10 minutes could reset his breathing. I learned how to speak without crowding him. How to give space without disappearing. And slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, he grew. Not loud, not flashy, but observant, precise. Brilliant in ways the world didn't immediately reward. I thought I was the one keeping us afloat. I didn't realize Jake had been quietly building something underneath us. Something that would eventually change everything. And when he turned 18, and that quiet project of his suddenly became worth millions, the past didn't stay buried. It came back, wearing a smile and a lawyer's letter. The night everything truly shifted didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, wrapped in rain, legal paper, and a smile that didn't reach a man's eyes. But before that letter ever showed up, before lawyers and courtrooms and whispered strategies, there was the moment I realized Jake's world was bigger and more fragile than I'd ever fully understood. It started with a soft click. No sparks, no warning, just silence. It was a Wednesday night in January. Rain hammered against the apartment windows, and the heater rattled like it was threatening to quit for good. I was at the kitchen table, trying, unsuccessfully, to balance our checkbook, knowing full well it never truly balanced. Jake sat across from me, shoulders hunched over his laptop. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He pressed it again, Held it down longer this time. Still nothing. Then he froze. Not angry, not panicked, just still. Like someone had paused him mid-breath. "Hey," I said carefully, setting my pen down. "What's wrong?" "It won't turn on," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the fear underneath it. I leaned closer, squinting at the black screen like that might magically fix it. "Maybe it needs a restart." "I already tried," he said, sharper than usual, then immediately softer. "Sorry." "It's okay," I told him. "We'll figure it out." But when I opened the back panel, my stomach sank. The laptop was held together with mismatched screws and hope. A pawn shop special we'd bought years earlier with emergency cash I kept hidden in the freezer. "Can you fix it?" Jake asked. I hesitated just a second too long. He noticed. "I'll try," I said. That night, after he went to bed, I sat at the table, surrounded by exposed circuits and dust that smelled faintly burnt. I didn't have the money to replace it, not even close. The next day, during my lunch break, I dug through the hospital's old maintenance storage room. "Claire," my supervisor said, watching me pull apart broken monitors, "what are you doing?" "Family emergency," I said. He sighed. "Take what you need." That night, Jake watched silently as I laid the salvaged parts out on the table. "You don't have to," he said. "Yes, I do," I replied. "Sit, help me." We worked together for 3 hours. At one point, he quietly pointed to a connection. "That one goes there," he said. He was right. When the screen flickered back to life, he exhaled like he'd been underwater. "Thank you," he said. That was when I understood. Computers weren't just a hobby to him. They were his language. The app didn't have a name back then, just folders. Notes taped to the wall, ideas scribbled in careful handwriting. A way to make places easier, he told me once. Navigation, sensory management. I didn't understand the code, but I understood the need. When he demoed it at a small library tech night, the laptop froze mid-presentation. Jake closed it slowly, apologizing. That night, he stopped working. A month later, I sold my truck. I bought him a refurbished laptop. "I can take the bus," I said when he protested. "You can't replace opportunity." Things changed after that, slowly, steadily. The app got a name, Pathway. Then came a competition. Then a newspaper clipping taped to our fridge. Then an email. Then a meeting. Then a number that made the room spin. $4 million. We didn't celebrate. We hired a lawyer. "Money doesn't change people," he warned us. It reveals them. 1 week later, the certified letter arrived from Ryan's attorney. That night, as rain streaked down the window, I realized something with terrifying clarity. Ryan hadn't come back because he missed his son. He'd come back because Jake was finally worth something, and that realization hurt more than his leaving ever had. I didn't sleep the night the letter arrived. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked unevenly with every rotation. Each sound landing like a countdown I couldn't stop. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to slow down. Financial matters. Those 2 words kept looping in my head. I imagined a courtroom I'd never wanted to step into. A judge I didn't know. A man who had vanished for 12 years suddenly rebranded as a concerned father. I imagined Jake being reduced to a case file. A balance sheet, a percentage. When morning finally came, my hands felt numb. Jake was already awake. He sat at the kitchen table, methodically sorting papers into neat stacks, dates aligned, edges squared, everything precise. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. "Organizing," he said. "Documentation." "For what?" He looked up at me, calm in that way that always made my chest ache. "For court." My first instinct was denial. "Jake, this isn't your responsibility," I said. "This is adult legal stuff. You shouldn't have to deal with this." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm 18, legally." "That's not what I mean," I said, sitting down hard in the chair across from him. "You shouldn't have to defend yourself against your own father." He slid a stack of papers toward me. Emails, voicemail transcripts, dates, times, notes. I stared at them, my throat tightening. "You kept all of this?" "Yes." "Why?" He paused, choosing his words carefully, like he always did when precision mattered. 6 years ago, he said something on the phone. He said, "Don't call me again unless there's money involved." My breath caught. When? I asked. April 22nd, 3:47 p.m. I remember because I was doing homework. Something cracked inside me then. I'd spent 12 years thinking I was the one protecting Jake. I hadn't realized he'd been quietly protecting us. 3 days later, Ryan showed up. He didn't knock. He just stood on the porch in the rain, like he'd stepped out for groceries and finally decided to come back inside. His hair was darker now, professionally done. His coat expensive, the kind meant to signal success. "Claire," he said softly, "can we talk?" Behind me, I felt it before I heard it. Jake's bedroom door opening just a fraction. "I think we said everything 12 years ago," I replied. Ryan glanced past me, eyes scanning the apartment, taking inventory. "I just want to see him," he said, "for a minute." "He's not property," I said. "You don't get to show up after 12 years like nothing happened." "I'm his father," he snapped. The word hit like a slap. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. Rain soaked through my jacket instantly. 12 years, I said. "You don't get to use that word like it still means something." "I wasn't in a good place," he argued. "Depression, anxiety." "You weren't anywhere," I said. "You just left." "I was drowning," he shot back. "Trapped in that apartment with a child who—" "Stop," I said sharply. "Don't finish that sentence." His tone softened. The manipulation I remembered too well. "I've grown," he said. "Therapy, healing." Behind the door, silence. Jake was listening. "You don't heal by abandoning your child," I said. "And you don't get to come back now because it's convenient." His eyes hardened. "I'm reclaiming what's mine." There it was. I went back inside and closed the door harder than necessary. Ryan followed, shaking rain from his coat like he belonged there. Jake stood in the hallway, pale, unreadable. "You've grown," Ryan said brightly. "You're practically a man now." Jake didn't respond. Ryan's gaze slid to the fridge, landing on the newspaper clipping taped there. "What's that article?" he asked. "None of your business," I said. He smiled slowly, calculating. "I'll be in touch," he said at the door. "No," I replied. "Don't come back." After he left, Jake spoke. Flat, certain. "He's lying." "How do you know?" I asked. "His breathing changed," Jake said. "He does that when he wants something." 3 days later, his lawyer confirmed it. Ryan wasn't coming back for his son. He was coming back for control. And for the first time since that October night 12 years ago, I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, resolve. The escalation didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one sharper than the last. The first was the official response from our attorney. Carefully worded, calm, firm. A refusal to grant Ryan any access to Jake's finances or decision-making authority without a court order. Ryan's reply arrived less than 48 hours later. Longer, colder. Wrapped in language that sounded reasonable if you didn't know him. Reestablishing parental bonds. Correcting past misunderstandings. Protecting his son's future. I recognized the pattern instantly. Ryan had always been good with words when he needed something. He didn't shout, he reframed. He didn't attack directly, he implied concern, painted himself as misunderstood, positioned others as unreasonable. And this time, he wasn't doing it alone. His parents called first. I hadn't spoken to them in years, not since Ryan disappeared and they quietly stopped returning my messages. Now, suddenly, they were very invested. "You have to understand," his mother said over the phone, her voice tight with restrained judgment. "He was young. He made mistakes. He was a father," I replied evenly. "That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice." Silence stretched on the line. Then came the guilt. "You're punishing him by keeping Jake away." I almost laughed. "I didn't keep Jake away," I said. Ryan walked away. His father took over the call next. His tone was colder, more strategic. "This money has changed things," he said. "It's made you defensive." "No," I replied. "It's made your son interested." They didn't like that answer. Friends Ryan hadn't spoken to in over a decade started reaching out. Messages that sounded supportive but carried the same undercurrent. Kids need their biological parents. Holding on to resentment isn't healthy. Think about what's best for Jake. What none of them asked was what Jake wanted. Jake noticed everything. He noticed when I stopped humming while cooking, when my jaw clenched reading emails, when I started triple-checking locks at night. "You're tense," he said one evening. Not accusatory, just observant. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. He watched me for a moment, then nodded. "You say that when you're not." The next escalation came with paperwork. Ryan filed a formal petition, not just for visitation, for financial oversight. The implication was clear, that I was manipulating Jake, that I was influencing his decisions, that I was controlling money that should legally involve both parents. Our attorney was blunt. "They're positioning you as an obstacle," he said. "If they succeed, the court could order shared authority." I felt my chest tighten. "After everything?" he sighed. "Family court doesn't always reward history. It weighs optics." Jake sat beside me in that office, hands folded neatly in his lap. "They're going to let him talk," he said calmly. "Yes," the attorney replied. "That's the risk." Jake nodded once, then turned to me. "That's why you can't interrupt him." I wanted to argue, to say this was unfair, that silence felt like surrender. But then Jake did something that stopped me cold. He pulled out a folder, thicker than I expected. Inside were printed emails, phone logs, voicemail transcripts, notes written in his careful handwriting, dates, times, patterns. He contacted me 6 times over 12 years, Jake said. 5 of those were after Pathway appeared online. Our attorney leaned forward slowly. "This is extensive." Jake didn't react to the praise. He just continued. "He exaggerates when he lies," Jake said. "He circles the same points. He contradicts himself if no one stops him." I felt something shift inside me. I'd spent years believing I was the shield, but Jake had been studying the storm. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the newspaper clipping on the fridge. I thought about all the years I'd stayed quiet to keep peace, all the times I'd softened my words to avoid conflict. This time, staying quiet wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And that terrified me more than confrontation ever had, because it meant trusting Jake completely and accepting that the man who left us wasn't coming back for love. He was coming back to take. The night before the hearing, I broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, alone in the kitchen, long after Jake had gone to bed. The apartment was dark except for the dim light above the sink. Rain tapped against the window in that familiar Portland rhythm, the same sound I'd heard the night Ryan left, the same sound that always made my chest feel tight, no matter how many years passed. I sat at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea I'd forgotten to drink. For the first time in 12 years, the question I'd buried deep finally surfaced. What if I wasn't enough? I had stayed. I had learned. I had sacrificed. I had done everything I could with the tools I had. But family court didn't measure bedtime routines or quiet reassurances whispered in the dark. It didn't measure the nights I sat on the floor outside Jake's room because he couldn't sleep and didn't want to be alone, but also couldn't be touched. It measured biology. Paper. Optics. I imagined a judge listening politely while Ryan spoke about growth and regret and reconnection. I imagined his calm voice filling the room while my entire body screamed to interrupt, to correct, to expose him. And I imagined losing, not completely, not in some dramatic total collapse, but losing just enough control to let Ryan wedge himself back into Jake's life through money. Enough access to reopen wounds Jake had spent years carefully stitching closed. The thought made my hands shake. I pressed my palms flat against the table, trying to ground myself, the way therapists had taught Jake, and by extension, me. Breathe in, count, breathe out. Still, the fear crawled up my spine. I realized then how alone I felt. Friends told me I was strong, that I'd handled everything amazingly, that Ryan didn't stand a chance. But none of them were sitting across from a courtroom where truth didn't always win. None of them had watched a child learn, far too early, that love could disappear without warning. I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the table and let myself feel it. The exhaustion, the grief, the anger I'd never fully released. For a moment, I wanted to run, not physically, but emotionally. I wanted someone else to take over, someone stronger, louder, more convincing. Then I heard Jake's door creak. Soft footsteps patted down the hallway. He didn't ask if he could sit with me. He just pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down, mirroring my posture without touching. "You're scared," he said gently. I didn't try to deny it. "Yes," I admitted. He nodded once, like that answer made sense. "That's logical." A tear slipped free before I could stop it. "I don't want him to hurt you again." Jake looked at me steadily. "He can't. Not the way he used to." "How do you know?" I whispered. "Because I'm not 7 anymore," he said. "And because I know who he is." That hurt more than anything. No child should have to know that about a parent. He slid a piece of paper toward me, a single page. "What's this?" I asked. "My summary," he said. "Not emotional, just factual. If you feel like you might react, look at this." I stared. Dates, quotes, contradictions, evidence. I understood then what Jake had been doing all these years. Not just preparing for court, but preparing for the possibility that I might falter. Not because I was weak, but because "I don't want to lose you," I said quietly. He frowned slightly. "You're not losing me. What if the judge?" I already knew what he was going to say. "Stay quiet," I whispered. He nodded. "And let him talk." After Jake went back to bed, I sat there a long time. The fear didn't disappear, but something else settled underneath it. Trust. Not in the system, not in fairness, but in the boy who had grown into a young man right in front of me, without ever making me feel replaced. And in that quiet kitchen, at my lowest point, I finally understood. The dark moment wasn't the risk of losing. It was the realization that I couldn't protect Jake the way I used to, because he no longer needed that kind of protection. He needed partnership. The courthouse smelled like old paper, disinfectant, and anxiety. That was the first thing I noticed as we stepped inside. How sterile everything felt, how stripped of humanity the space was. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too unforgiving. Every sound echoed, shoes against tile, murmured conversations, the distant slam of a heavy door. Ryan was already there. He stood near the benches with his lawyer, dressed carefully. Not flashy, not sloppy. Neutral colors, soft posture. The image of a man trying very hard to look reasonable. When his eyes landed on Jake, his face softened instantly. There it was. The performance. I felt my chest tighten, the familiar urge rising in my throat, the need to correct, to expose, to interrupt. I didn't. Jake walked beside me, calm and upright. His shoulders were relaxed, his breathing even. He wasn't afraid. That realization grounded me more than any breathing exercise ever had. Inside the courtroom, we took our seats. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. And then Ryan began to talk. He spoke about regret, about immaturity, about how mental health struggles had clouded his judgment years ago. He spoke about growth, about therapy, about how success had finally given him the stability to show up. He spoke about love. He used that word often. I watched the judge's pen move steadily across the page. I watched Ryan's lawyer nod at all the right moments, and I stayed quiet. Ryan circled his points, just like Jake predicted. Repeated phrases, reframed absences as misunderstandings, painted himself as someone who had always meant to come back. Then came the contradiction. Ryan claimed he'd tried repeatedly to reconnect. Jake's lawyer stood. "May I submit evidence?" The judge nodded. Emails appeared on the screen. Phone logs, voicemail transcripts, dates, gaps, silence. Ryan shifted in his seat. Then came the line, the one Jake had told me about. "Don't call me again unless there's money involved." The courtroom went still. Ryan opened his mouth. too quickly. And that was it. He over-explained. He talked faster. He added context no one asked for. He contradicted himself, trying to soften words he'd already spoken. I watched the judge stop writing, watched her look up, watched her eyes narrow, not in anger, but in clarity. That was the turning point. Not drama. Not outrage. Just the truth, laid out quietly, methodically, without emotion. Jake was asked if he wanted to speak. He stood, not stiff, not rehearsed, just composed. I don't need a relationship with my father to feel complete, he said evenly. I needed safety. I had that. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't need to. The judge nodded once. I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in months. This wasn't about me proving I was enough. This was about Jake showing who he had become. And no one, not biology, not money, not regret, could take that away. The ruling came down on a cold Thursday morning. No dramatic pause, no raised voices, just the steady voice of a judge who had seen this story before, who knew the difference between regret and responsibility. Ryan's request for control over Jake's assets was denied. Not partially, completely. The judge cited documented abandonment, inconsistent contact, and most importantly, Ryan's own words. She ordered him to cover a portion of our court costs and issued a formal warning about filing future motions without substantive cause. When the gavel came down, the sound was sharp and final. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes for half a second and let my lungs finally fill all the way. Ryan didn't look at us. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clenched like he was holding on to something already gone. His lawyer leaned in and whispered urgently, but Ryan didn't respond. Outside on the courthouse steps, the air hit my face like freedom. Cold, clean, real. Ryan walked past us without a word. His shoes clicked sharply against the stone, the sound echoing longer than it should have. No apology, no goodbye, just a man moving quickly away from the consequences he'd finally reached. Jake turned to me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, my throat too tight at first. "Yeah," I managed. "I really am." And I meant it. The fallout didn't stop there. Within weeks, Ryan's parents stopped calling. Friends who'd pressured me to be reasonable went quiet when the court documents became public record. The narrative Ryan tried to sell of a misunderstood father denied access collapsed under the weight of facts. He didn't lose loudly. He lost quietly, which, I realized, was far worse for someone like him. Jake didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He moved forward. A week later, he asked if we could use the church hall on Thursday nights. "For what?" I asked. "A support group," he said, "for families like ours." We set up folding chairs, brewed terrible coffee, labeled a cardboard box for donations. The first night, 6 people showed up. The second week, 14. A month later, Jake used part of his earnings from Pathway to start a small scholarship fund for neurodivergent students. Watching him speak, calm, precise, compassionate, I felt something settle deep in my chest. This wasn't revenge. This was impact. Ryan never came back. And for the first time, I understood that closure doesn't always look like an apology. Sometimes it looks like silence, earned. Life didn't reset after the court case. It rebalanced. The apartment felt quieter, not empty, just settled. Like a room after a storm has passed, when the air is still damp but breathable again. I noticed small things returning to me. Humming while I cooked, leaving the windows cracked even when it rained, sleeping through the night without jolting awake to imagined knocks on the door. Jake thrived in that quiet. Thursday nights at the church hall became routine. Folding chairs scraped softly against the floor. Coffee brewed too strong. People showed up carrying fear, exhaustion, and hope in uneven proportions. Jake talked about routines and navigation tools. I talked about paperwork and patience, about staying when leaving would have been easier. One night, as we locked up the hall, I finally asked him the question that had been sitting heavy in my chest since court. "How did you know?" I said. "Back then, when you told me to let him talk." Jake didn't answer right away. He thought the way he always did, carefully, precisely. "People who lie," he said finally, "over-explain. People who tell the truth don't need to." I felt something click into place. For 12 years, I thought staying meant doing more, working harder, sacrificing louder, fixing everything with my hands. I thought love was measured in exhaustion and endurance. But staying also meant knowing when to be still, knowing when silence was strength. Ryan never came back. And that was okay. Because family isn't who shows up when there's money on the table. It isn't who rehearses regret once success makes absence inconvenient. Family is who stays when nobody's watching, who sits at kitchen tables sorting paperwork without being asked, who learns a child's rhythms, not to control them, but to protect them. I didn't give birth to Jake, but I raised him. And in the end, he didn't just grow into someone extraordinary because I stayed. He grew extraordinary because we stayed for each other. That's the lesson I carry now, and the one I hope someone listening needs to hear. You don't need biology to build a family. You don't need permission to choose loyalty. And you don't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay quiet and let the truth speak for itself.